Should you be a completionist reader or watcher? I'm mostly going to be talking about comics today, but this applies to other forms of media as well. In fact, the example that I'm going to springboard off of here is media. It's Star Wars, because I saw someone mention that they have a cousin who every year will take a month of their time to go and watch every single piece of Star Wars media, from films to shows, in chronological order to quote-unquote get the complete experience. And that took me back to when I was first getting into comics, and I decided to do so by reading Amazing Spider-Man from issue 1 onwards. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't regret doing that, because it instilled a love of Silver Age comics in me, which I'm not sure I would have discovered otherwise. Most people recommending comic books on YouTube start from like the 80s onwards, but I think you should absolutely go and check out the beginnings of Amazing Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and stuff, because they are delightful in their own way. It's just a bit more reading. But while I was partially interested in seeing the very original Spider-Man comics, the main point of interest for me was in starting from the beginning and working my way through to the modern day. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to read. If you want to do that, that is your prerogative, you should do that. But I would like to warn you. The first and most obvious warning is that the quality fluctuates, okay? Like, you hear people talk about critically acclaimed writers and stuff like that. There's also the stinkers. And sometimes it's not even stinkers, it's just hundreds and hundreds of issues of stories which have no real, like, importance to them beyond the pages in which they take place. Unlike modern comics, Silver Age comics were a lot happier just being like, and this is the adventure of the week, and maybe we'll reference it later, but it's probably not going to come up again until maybe the villain shows up again, and then we'll make a brief mention of the last time we saw them. Doesn't mean they're not worth reading in their own right, but it does mean that you may burn out on the stories a little bit faster. But the main warning I want to point out to you is, if you are looking to be a completionist reader and read every single Spider-Man comic book in chronological order, chances are you are doing so because you are hoping to get a complete, comprehensive, encyclopedic view of the character and everything he's ever gone through, with the expectation that the character is going to make sense as someone who's been through all of that, and everything about his past is going to remain in an orderly manner. But that is not the case, and I'm just using Spider-Man as an example. I would say this is the same of pretty much every long-running comic book character, because when you have a story that's being told for this long and being written by this many people with their own ideas, there are going to be retcons, there are going to be inconsistencies, there are going to be things that just straight up get forgotten, and you're going to remember them because you read them like a couple of months ago, while they might have been published 30, 40 years ago. And so you're going to start to notice these inaccuracies and inconsistencies, and it's going to bother you because you're not going to feel rewarded for being a completionist reader who knows the entire history of Spider-Man, including that one time when he killed Wolverine's girlfriend by accident, you know? Does that get brought up very often? It did in like one anniversary issue, I remember, but other than that, I'm not so sure. Or the time when he went to Scotland with Mary Jane and had a whole adventure up there. Or the time when he went to this weird fairy tale land, you know, like, these are not things which come up again. And I take joy in having read them and knowing that I can refer back to them in my own mind, but I also sometimes read modern comics and go, well, I'm not sure he would react this way because he already has an experience of this kind of situation all the way back in, oh, the writer doesn't know about that story. There are also times when I try and read modern Spider-Man comics and I think about just the amount of things which have happened to this person, and he does not seem like a real character who could possibly exist in his current state of existence. He still has some naivete to him, you know, and like, there are just moments when I'm like, kid, you've been to space, you fought gods, and you're reacting this way to this street level thing that's happening. Like, you know, it begins to bother me sometimes, and I think it's more a Spider-Man problem than anything, but that is also a general problem for other characters. For instance, Doctor Who, we can talk about that. Doctor Who is another character who's been around since the 60s, and there are stories which happen where he reacts to things or she reacts to things in a certain way that make me go, haven't you kind of been here before? Why are you not thinking about that? Why are you not referencing that? So not only is it not necessarily rewarding you in the way that you might want it to, but it is also potentially harming your ability to appreciate modern stories for what they are in themselves. Comics are continually given new jumping on points and soft reboots for new readers, and they're not really intended to be read as one entire long continuum, despite being advertised that way sometimes with legacy issue numbers. And I personally have found a lot more reward in recent years of finding a modern jumping on point, and then later on, if I'm curious about that character's history, going back and finding that after the fact. For instance, I have recently started reading 4 Volume 3 by J. Michael Straczynski. I will talk more about that when I finish it, but there are some things in there where I'm like, I'm curious to see what that's referring to, or the origin of that particular matter. Maybe I will go back and read Journey into Mystery, or more likely probably Walter Simonson Zero, which I hear is very good. I'm a huge fan of Daredevil, and I first started reading that with Volume 2, which was the Marvel Knights launch, which, ended up being Brian Michael Bendis' run after a little while. And I'm just now getting around to reading the original Frank Miller run. There is a part in my mind which rails against the inconsistency of reading things in a non-chronological order, but with comics especially as a medium, it does tend to work out pretty well. Comic book characters, or at least Marvel and DC comic book characters, tend to be written in a way where they are anticipating people reading that character from one of 2 perspectives. 1, I don't know much about this character and I'm experiencing this story. 2, I've read everything this character's ever been through, and the character can react in a way where the new reader will go, oh, that's cool, and the old reader will go, oh, he's reacting this way because of this. I remember, it's not explicitly stated, but it makes sense that they might be reacting this way because of this event from 300 issues ago. Why does Batman have trust issues? If you're a new reader approaching the comic, Batman has trust issues because Batman is Batman. If you're someone who's read a bunch of old Batman comics, Batman has trust issues because he's been betrayed so many times. And you've seen it happen within those pages. Batman's not going to sit there and tell you that in Batman Rebirth era or whatever, but it's a thing. You're not missing out by not reading the old stuff. You are gaining something by going back and reading the old stuff, but you might not be served if you intend to go back and read everything because you want to make sure that everything is cohesive throughout the entire run of that character's 80-year-long history, if we're talking Batman. And to take it back to what I was talking about at the beginning about this person who goes and watches through all of Star Wars in chronological order, obviously when they were making the original movies, they had no idea it was going to become this massive extended universe. And even the prequels do take some liberties with some of the stuff that the original trilogy makes reference to. Both the prequels and the sequels expand the way the Force works and its abilities. And so you might be watching the original trilogy during a chronological viewing and going, I mean, why wouldn't he just, use the Force to send that flying away from him or something? That's not a concrete example, but you know what I mean? The big one for me is, why is Ben Kenobi so shit at fighting? And the headcanon kind of has to be, well, he's old and his bones hurt. But, that's not how Obi-Wan fought in the prequels. And also, look, I like The Acolyte. I like what it was trying to do. I think it's a shame it got cancelled. It's not the best Star Wars story out there. Are you going to start your chronological viewing of Star Wars with The Acolyte, knowing that it gets cancelled after 1 season, and that all the plot threads you're watching get dropped and never brought up again? Is that an optimal viewing experience? Is that the best way to appreciate a story? Now, another example. A lot of the time when I look at a series of books, for instance, The Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson, part of my brain just goes, well, just read it in release order, because release order is the order in which it was released, and anyone keeping up with a series over time would have read it in that order. It's the easiest answer, because especially with the Cosmere, it's there are so many different reading orders, and for the most part that is what I did. But if I was to continue doing that, I would have to read multiple series concurrently, as in, for instance, book 5 of one series and then book 1 of a new series and book 6 of that previous series and book 2 of that previous series, and that just wouldn't flow very well. So as it turns out, publication order isn't always the best order either. Not all the time anyway, sometimes it is. Sometimes, should I read Lord of the Rings in publication order? Yeah, you should. It's a few books. Don't start with a Silmarillion, for God's sake. What I'm getting at here is it's not simple. And especially with comics, to tie it back into that, a lot of comic reading has a lot of research which entails it, okay, if I'm going to sit down and this is what I did like about a month or two ago, I want to get into 4 comics. What am I going to do? I'm going to sit down, I'm going to look up videos of people talking about the best runs of 4 comics, the best jumping on points, find something that sounds good for me. I know I'm widely read enough now to know kind of roughly which eras of comics I tend to enjoy, and I thought, hey, 4 by Dan Jurgens, that's kind of like the first time Marvel were doing, like resetting the issue numbers, volume 2 and stuff like that. I really enjoyed Daredevil from that kind of time period. I will read 4 by Dan Jurgens. That was actually a misfire. I read the first 11 or 12 issues and I was just kind of having an okay time, and so I thought, do I jump ahead to volume 3? But then I'm going to miss a whole bunch of lore that happens in between. Then I reminded myself, this is comics. Don't worry about that shit. And I did that, and I've had a fantastic time doing that. There have been a couple of references to things where I go, don't know what that's about, but that's fine. That's just stuff to learn about later if it sticks in my brain and is something I want to go look up. So no, you don't need to read Amazing Spider-Man from issue 1 all the way to issue whatever the hell we're on nowadays, and your experience might actually be hindered in doing so. However, if you love the character already and you want to see his earliest stories and how events played out for the very first time, I can't recommend it enough. It's fantastic. Sorry, no, it's amazing. At least I think I read like the first 150 issues or so, and then I found a reading order that was like, these are the stories you can skip, they're not quite so important. And that's going to be your friend as well, especially if you're reading comics digitally via like a Marvel Unlimited or a DC Universe Infinite subscription. Comicbookreadingorders.com hasn't really steered me wrong. I haven't really been using it too much lately. I've been relying on my own research and my own like understanding of comic book history and, looking up where to jump on and the best runs and stuff like that. But if you really have no clue about all of that stuff and that intimidates you, that is where I got my start in reading comics, by kind of like listening to the advice of comicbookreadingorders.com. But yeah, wrestling myself away from the idea of being an encyclopedia reader is something I do still have to do every now and again. I did almost start 4 with Journey into Mystery, but I was like, no, come on. You don't have to do that. Maybe I'll do it one day, but I have to really examine what I'm looking for in a 4 story. Am I looking for a Silver Age 4 story? Not at this moment. Anyway, I hope that made sense. Thanks for checking this video out. It's my first time doing like a topic video instead of like a review on this channel, so I hope that it served you. And if you are interested in hearing me talk about comics or sometimes Star Wars media, I did like an Andor review, for instance, you can always check out my other videos on this channel and subscribe if you want to see more. If you could leave a like on the video if you liked it as well, that would be very helpful. And I will catch you in whatever I make next.